Hey everybody, today's video is going to be all about this new apron I just completed. This is the second version of this apron that I've built, and it just has a few key improvements over the first version. Now today's video is going to focus essentially on all the functions of it, as well as everything I like to carry around when I'm working. And in about a week or so, I'll hopefully put out a video about how I cobbled this thing together, so stay tuned for that. Now the most obvious function of an apron is to help keep you clean when you're doing your work, and almost any apron can accomplish this task. Everything beyond that is kind of a bonus, and you can kind of tailor it to how you like to work. In a general layout, I like a split leg design. I think just, walking around, it makes that easier, as well as going to the bathroom. Besides that, I think having a nice and easy closure system so that you can take this thing on and off is very helpful. The previous version of my apron, I had to tie it behind my back every time I wanted to put it on or take it off. And this apron, I've specifically designed it around just having a single clip point. That makes that process just way faster. And beyond that, there's just storage for things that you use very frequently. Now I'm going to first point out one little feature of this apron that actually is on the inside of it, and that is that I've wanted some internal pockets in my apron for things like phones. So this apron I modified actually used to have pockets on the outside here, but now if I want, I can take my phone and I can essentially slide it into an internal pocket. I like this because I definitely want my phone to not get a bunch of dust, but I also don't want it, kind of in my general tool area. I don't want to make a specific pocket on the front here because it's really not something that should be distracting me. So internal pocket, I think, is really handy for things like that you want to stay out of your way, but you're going to be carrying around. Next up, once we're actually talking about the front tool storage, I like to really consider what your dominant and non-dominant hand does. I'm left-handed, so for most people this will be completely reversed, but my left hand is essentially always doing all my writing, as well as holding sharp objects. And then my non-dominant hand, or my right hand, it will often hold the tool that I'm using to reference whatever I'm marking. So let's kind of talk about that process. The most important thing for the left hand, I think, is writing utensils. Now, these slots on the side here are basically sized to house writing utensils, and I gave this a lot of thought in my original design because I felt like it was a pretty ergonomic way to get to all your writing utensils. So the four that live on this side are essentially the four that I use most frequently. So just a quick little interruption here to talk about why I like to carry 4 different sizes of pencils on my apron. This may seem a little ridiculous, and depending on the type of work you do or your workflow, it may be ridiculous, but I like to use the 0.5, 0.7, 1.3, and then essentially a mechanical carpenter's pencil like you would get, general construction style. Now, the first thing is obviously durability. If you have something like a carpenter's pencil, almost any rough surface you can just draw on it. But if you have something like a 0.5 pencil, you can, with all these imperfections and this 2x4 surface, this lead is just extremely brittle. So although it has great precision, it makes a very fine mark, it just doesn't work for things like that, like rough cut lumber and such. The 0.7 obviously does a little better, but this is where that 1.3 millimeter pencil I think is fantastic. It doesn't leave this kind of giant wide kind of mark when it's dulled out. It will always leave a fairly nice line, but even on rough surfaces, these 1.3 millimeter pencils I think are great for that. They're kind of the in-between. To the point where about the only time I find myself using these mechanical pencils is actually when I'm doing that sanding trick, where you cover the whole surface with pencil lines lightly and then try to sand them all evenly. And then that brings kind of to the other uses of then, if I am using this so frequently, why do I rely on these two? Honestly, it's if we were to make a mark against a straight edge, let's just go down the list. So the 0.5, it can really tuck in here nicely and make a very nice mark. 0.7 does almost the same job. As we start to work with the 1.3, you can see it starts to gap away from the line. And then obviously a pencil like this, even if we try to dig it into the corner as much as possible, it's just not going to do a good job. This one, we can kind of try to tuck in there harder, but you can see it is not drawing right up to the line. So, with these two, you can say, hey, you're basically getting the same result. Why are you still carrying this 0.5? And that is solely for these Incra Rules that I find are about the best, most accurate way to make layouts that I have found. They come in these T-square versions, and they come in just these perforated ruler versions. I really just like the fact you can set this up from an edge. It has these little slots. You can draw little lines exactly where you need. or you can take one of these squares and you essentially just run them on the edges and make lines. So that is why I continue to have the 0.5 pencil with me, because when I'm actually at the bench here laying things out, I've just really come to incorporate these Incra Rules into my workflow. So I really like having that pencil. Now, the reason I don't actually carry these rules on my apron is because I think part of the reason they're so good is because they're nice and straight, they lay flat, but with that comes the fact that they are not extremely durable. I imagine if I put this in my shop apron, I would quickly, nick these corners, roll them over accidentally, or just kink the whole thing. So unfortunately, can't carry those with me on my apron. Now, the reason why I like these mechanical pencils, I don't know, I've just used them a long time. I like the feel of the aluminum. It just feels like a nice and rigid pencil. And I like the fact that you can get the 0.5 and the 0.7 in different colors. Just makes it really easy to identify that this is the 0.5 and this is the 0.7. All right, and here's an up close of that 1.3 millimeter pencil. It has an eraser, which you may or may not use. I don't use erasers a whole lot in my shop. But yeah, it just works like a mechanical pencil. And here you go. I just bought more. This thing costs $3 at the time this video is being made. You get 5 pencils, more leads, some erasers. They've made the colors of these top parts a little more hokey looking. They got kind of some gloss or some glitter to them, but $3 for 5 pencils. And the only way I've really ever broken these is I've either crushed them by like driving over them by accident, or I just eventually lose them. That's about the only reason I ever need more of these. I've just been really impressed. I think there's many like super fancy pencils out there, but for the cost, I don't think these can be beat. And then this mechanical carpenter's pencil, I don't know if this is the world's greatest pencil. You kind of learn that you've got to be pinching. The way this thing works is it essentially opens these flaps here, and then these leads, they index into it. I have had problems with this thing essentially pushing all the way in when applying pressure, but you just kind of learn, well, I guess I've learned, unfortunately now, you just kind of grab it like that and keep these closed if you are writing with quite a bit of pressure. Now, back to talking about that apron. We talked about the other function of the left hand is sharp objects. Now, I've got 2 knives that I use in my shop almost all the time. The first one is actually this Starrett box cutter. I have come to absolutely love this knife. You can lock it out so that the blade doesn't extend in case you're using it in a place that you don't want to accidentally cut yourself. You can adjust the blade depth by turning this knob here. I think that can just be really handy sometimes when you're scoring something. You can set it so that blade is just barely protruding. And it's a box cutter, so once in a while I'll cut something across my concrete floor, but they're disposable little blades, so it absolutely doesn't matter. Anyways, this knife, out of all the box cutters I've used, I just feel it's a really simple motion to actually get the blade to come out. Way simpler than one of those slide ones. And once you're holding it, you're going to be grasping it firmly anyway, so this kind of large trigger system I think just works fantastic. So good job, Starrett. That's a great knife. So that's something I incorporated into this apron, is actually the sheath that comes with it. Now it's a little sticky at this point, and I really hope that goes away with just use. But anyways, that lives right there. And then the other general shop knife I use is actually this gift I got from Blue Spruce Tools. This is a work of art. I've put it through its paces I probably need to resharpen it, is basically what I'm saying. But for general shop stuff, I absolutely love this knife. So that's the other knife that lives there on my left hip. Now, if you look at this design here, I've got these little kind of pouches, and that is because I don't like things flopping around, and I find like these big knife holsters, they can kind of flop around. So I've got little retainers there so that they stay put. Now, when I actually got this knife, I got it as a gift from a family member, and they also gave me the smaller version of it from Blue Spruce Tools. If you're looking to buy somebody a gift, a woodworker, both of these are great options. That said, the sheath that comes with them, I felt like was pretty functionless. I mean, for this one, which is designed to clip on a belt, the knife actually falls all the way in, and trying to pick this thing out is kind of a pain. So Blue Spruce, if you ever watch this, you may notice that I've modified my essentially sheath holder here to essentially cut this large part out, and that way I can actually grab the knife a lot easier. So that's just something to keep in mind, that make sure you can actually access your tools. So that's why with this thing being a little sticky, that's a little cumbersome right now, but I hope that as time goes on, that motion becomes easier. After that, we talked about like main things that the right hand does, which is hold measurement tools. So first thing up is this fast cap tape measure. I love these fast cap tape measures. The lefty righty kind of labeling for being left-handed is really nice for me because I'm usually measuring things the opposite direction of most of the world. But what I absolutely hate about their tape measures is this clip right here. The one that comes on it is this like black spring clip, and I find it just does not stay anywhere where you need it to. So I've actually replaced it with just a generic clip off some other crappy tape measure. And then I sewed this little thing on here to click in right there. So that's where I like to carry my tape measure. That lives there at all time. I also just a lot of times will just go ahead and write on the tape measure. So you can see I've got quite a bit of marks there. I should go through and clean it up. These tape measures have a lot of cool functions. I like them a lot. They come with a little built-in sharpener right there, so you can sharpen traditional pencils. I don't use those a whole lot, but whenever I do need a sharpener in the shop, it's good to know that it comes right there. You know, finally, you can just write whatever you like on that little label there. So I like those a lot. The next kind of measurement layout tool that I'm always reaching for is this Woodpecker's Indexable Mini Square. Woodpeckers makes great stuff. I do have a couple qualms with this square. First up is that for this last index point, they've essentially made this bar 6 3/8 inches long. So sometimes this can be a little annoying when you're trying to measure off the back end to remember about that 3/8. But the build quality of it is fantastic. There's absolutely zero play in the bar. It makes a perfect right angle. So I love this tool, minus that 6 3/8. I'd rather just like not have this last little indexing point and just have a straight 6-inch rule there. So that lives right there. And then kind of opposite of that is this little mini caliper from Incise. Now I really like this thing. It's only a 3-inch caliper. It's the only one I could find. Some functions that I absolutely love about it is if you turn it on, you know, it turns on. But if it's not on, the second you actually start to open it up, open the jaws, it will also turn on. So usually what I'll do is I'll lock it out of my pocket, and it has an automatic off function as well. So I think, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes, the screen will turn off, which honestly is great because living in an apron, quite frequently the buttons will just get pressed by the fabric. So that would just blow through your batteries really fast. But that lives across from there. And those are kind of my core tools. If I had an apron that just held those, I'd be fine for most days of work. But, you know, being me, I've decided to strap some other things into this apron. First up, these little 6-inch rules I find for layout, I'll often use 2 to kind of, you know, make different measurements off of corner pieces and such. So these Mitutoyo, I believe that's how you pronounce it, are just really nice and rigid. You could definitely just get some cheaper ones, but those 2, they tend to live right there. Usually I'm not carrying this mic, so pulling those in and out is a little easier. And then next to it, I actually have 2 more little rules that I like to use. This one I like to use because it actually has centimeters on it. I find that I just need centimeters once in a while, and this is just a nice little one. I'm not actually sure where I bought it, but nice and rigid. And then I just have one more of these. I don't know, they're just not too big, so they fit right there. Again, with the mic, a little cumbersome. Whoops. All right, moving onwards. I've got a magnetic little extending pickup magnetic tool. Woodworking, this isn't a whole lot of use, but working on vans, really nice to have one of these handy. This will just live in this bottom slot here. And then the other 3 writing utensil spots, they get taken up by things like once in a while, I'll just have a second 1.3 millimeter pencil there because, I don't know, I use these so much that if I do misplace one, I just really like having it easy to grab. Once in a while, I'll use this red mechanical pencil. Sometimes if I have a lot of marks on a piece of wood, relaying things out, it's easier to just at the end, just have a little red mark so I can actually mark what is my final measurements instead of coming back to it a few days later and wondering which of these 30 different little marks I've made is the one I should be focused on. So that will live there. And then this top spot will be a Sharpie. Right now I've got a red one handy, but often that'll just be a black Sharpie. After that, about the only 2 things left. This is a chisel that I broke at one point, so I've kind of turned it into a little, you know, drill location marker. I use that quite frequently when I don't want to just make a bunch of pencil marks. I'll just go and indent my locations. So that will usually live up there. And then I like to have this little flashlight. I use this thing in it's like a first line of defense. Like when I need to see something up close, I'll use this for a brief second, But if it's actually somewhere I actually got to do some work, I'm either going to get a headlamp or just like a bigger work light. So, but it is nice to have this thing. Sometimes, you know, I'll even be like laying under the van. It's a lot easier to just pull this out of my apron than to have to walk, like get up, walk across the shop and grab another light. So that will live right there. Now these top slots, I'm hoping to break in a little bit. They're not, you know, they're just not kind of molded, but my experience with leather is it usually, you know, starts to take form after a little bit of time. So that's essentially everything that lives on my apron. I've got this pocket down here. Once in a while, I'll use a bunch of fasteners, so I think it's nice to have some pocket. Compared to my old version of this apron, I added some top flaps. This leather really needs to soften up at this point, but I think, you know, a couple weeks of use, or maybe even just buying some leather softener, I think it will just help out. Anyways, that's everything I like to have on me when I'm working. This just prevents me a lot of time just walking back and forth in the shop looking for things. So I'm really happy that this thing is built now. The last one was just starting to have some kind of flaws in it that were getting in the way of my work. So I'll probably be sporting this thing for the next bit of time. And hopefully you enjoyed this video, and thank you for watching.